The base was alive in its own way. Dust kicked up with every Humvee that roared through the gates. The metallic clang of distant machinery echoed across the motor pool, and the smell of oil, sweat, and desert heat clung to the air. It was a rhythm, a heartbeat of controlled chaos, where every soldier had a purpose, every Marine a role, and every operator a mission. And then there was her. Most of the men and women on base knew her only by her first name, Rachel. To some, she was the hair lady. To others, just Mom. She wasn't in uniform. Instead, she wore jeans and a t-shirt most days, a black apron tied around her waist when she worked. In her small shop on the edge of the main plaza, the whirring buzz of clippers was as constant as the drone of aircraft overhead. Soldiers filed in with overgrown hair and left minutes later with sharp regulation cuts, laughing or complaining about the heat, the food, or the next deployment rotation. To them, she was just another contractor, a civilian, someone tucked away in the background of war, useful for keeping appearances sharp, but far removed from the dangers outside the wire. They didn't think much about her life, her past, or what she did when she locked the door each night. That was fine with Rachel. She liked the quiet. Cutting hair was a rhythm she understood. Clip, comb, trim, repeat. She could listen without being noticed, ask questions without raising suspicion. She'd learned more about these men through casual chatter than most officers ever knew. She heard about the ones who missed home, the ones who lived for the adrenaline, the ones who carried grief they would never speak about openly. Her chair became a place of confession, laughter, sometimes even silence. Fade, high and tight? She'd ask, already knowing the answer. Yeah, same as always. They'd grin, sliding into the chair. Her scissors clicked, the clippers hummed, and her hands moved with practiced precision. Soldiers joked about her being the base's real MVP because everyone looked squared away after a visit. But for Rachel, this was more than a job. It was a mask, a way to stay hidden in plain sight. Because behind those calm brown eyes, behind the easy smile she wore, lay a life that most of them would never believe. Her father had been a Marine sniper, a man who raised her on discipline and steel. She grew up in the quiet woods of Virginia, where he drilled her in things no ordinary child learned: marksmanship, patience, situational awareness. While other kids went to sleepovers, she crawled through mud, learning how to steady her breath until even the rustle of leaves couldn't distract her. He'd place tin cans on fence posts and tell her to wait, not to fire when she wanted, but to fire only when the world went still. Patience wins fights, he'd whisper. Impulses get you killed. By the time she was 16, she could outshoot him on the range. He laughed about it, proud and a little unnerved. But he also reminded her of the weight that came with that skill. Guns aren't about glory, he said. They're about responsibility. Remember that. Life, however, pulled her away from that world. College, odd jobs, and eventually a chance to work abroad led her down a different path. When the contractor position opened at the military base overseas, she took it, thinking it would be steady pay and a way to contribute without stepping into the chaos of combat. Cutting hair seemed safe, predictable. She could leave behind the part of herself her father had shaped. At least, that's what she told herself. Now, every day in the barbershop felt like two lives colliding. The soldiers saw her as background noise, but she saw them as reminders of a world she once belonged to. When they talked about firefights, ambushes, or near misses, she stayed quiet, nodding, offering the occasional smile. No one guessed that she understood far more than she let on. No one knew that the hands trimming their hair had once steadied a rifle with equal confidence. She found comfort in the small details. The way a soldier leaned back in the chair and finally let go of the tension in his shoulders. The way jokes rolled more easily when they saw themselves sharp, and squared away in the mirror. She became part of their routine, part of the fabric of the base. But sometimes, when the clippers were quiet and the shop was empty, Rachel would stare at her reflection. She'd see the faint lines on her face, the strength in her posture, the steady gaze her father had once told her made her dangerous. She wondered if she had buried that part of herself too deep. Wondered if she was fooling herself by thinking the world would never ask her to use it again. Outside her shop, the base never slept. Helicopters thundered across the sky, boots crunched across gravel, and armored vehicles lined up for convoys that disappeared beyond the walls. War was never far away. Rachel knew it. Everyone did. But she hoped that her role would remain what it was, safe, hidden, unremarkable. At night, she locked the door, folded her apron, and set her scissors neatly on the counter. The shop smelled faintly of aftershave and dust. She'd sit by the small window, watching the guards on patrol, the glow of the floodlights against the desert. Sometimes she closed her eyes and remembered her father's voice, the way he'd say, "The world has a way of testing us when we least expect it." Rachel never knew how soon those words would come true. For now, she was just the hairdresser. The woman who made soldiers look sharp for inspections, who offered a smile when they needed it, who asked no questions when they fell silent in her chair. That was her life, simple and unnoticed. But out beyond the wire, forces were moving. Shadows gathered, plans were set in motion, and war had already chosen her place in it. She didn't know it yet, but the clippers in her hands would soon give way to something far heavier. And when that moment came, every soldier who had ever sat in her chair would see her for who she truly was. Rachel's shop looked ordinary. A simple chair, a mirror slightly cracked in the corner, a counter with scattered combs, clippers, and bottles of aftershave. To anyone else, it was just another barbershop tucked into a U.S. military base overseas. Soldiers came in, swapped jokes, and left with sharp regulation cuts. No one gave much thought to the quiet woman holding the scissors. But behind those quiet brown eyes lay a history no one on base could have guessed. She hadn't started life as a hairdresser. Rachel was born into the shadow of discipline, forged in the quiet backwoods of Virginia, where her father, Sergeant Major William Hart, raised her. He was a Marine sniper, a man who lived and breathed precision. The kind of man who could sit in the freezing rain for hours without flinching, who could pick out the faintest movement a mile away. To Rachel, he wasn't just her father, he was her first teacher, her first drill instructor, her first example of what it meant to be unbreakable. While other little girls spent weekends at birthday parties, Rachel spent hers crawling through mud, her father's voice sharp in her ear. Stay low. Control your breathing. Watch the tree line. The world won't wait for you to be ready. He wasn't cruel, but he was relentless. He taught her how to shoot before she was 10, starting with tin cans on fence posts, then moving to watermelons and clay pigeons. By the time she was a teenager, she could hit targets her father struggled with. He never hid his pride, though he tempered it with warnings. Guns don't make you strong, Rachel. They make you responsible. Every bullet leaves a story behind. Don't you ever forget that. She didn't. Her father taught her more than marksmanship. He taught her patience, survival, and how to disappear when the world demanded stillness. She learned to build fires in the rain, to find north without a compass, to read people's intentions by their eyes and posture. He taught her that strength wasn't about muscle, it was about control. And she absorbed it all. But as she grew older, life pulled her away. She tried to live like everyone else: college, odd jobs, a taste of freedom, far from military bases and firing ranges. She dyed her hair, laughed too loud, spent nights in crowded diners with friends who never once held a rifle. For a while, she thought she had outrun the shadow of her father's world. Then he died, It was sudden an accident on a rainy road, not a battlefield. The irony cut deep. A man who had survived war zones, ambushes, and sniper hunts overseas was taken by something as ordinary as a slick patch of asphalt. Rachel was 23, and the funeral was the first time she'd seen Marines salute with tears in their eyes. She stood by his casket, hands trembling, and felt the weight of his lessons pressed down on her chest. He had raised her to be more than ordinary, and now he was gone. She promised herself she would never forget what he taught her. But she also promised she would never let it consume her life the way it had consumed his. That was when she found her way into hairdressing. It wasn't planned. She had always been good with her hands, and after his death, she craved something quiet, something far from rifles and combat boots. Cutting hair gave her rhythm, routine, and control. Each snip of the scissors was precise, measured almost like the squeeze of a trigger, but softer, without the cost of blood. Her first shop was small, tucked between a diner and a laundromat. She worked long days, cutting hair for anyone who walked in, truckers, kids, even off-duty cops. They sat in her chair, talking about their lives, their worries, their hopes. She listened, never judging, never revealing too much of her own past. It was a different kind of battlefield, one of trust and silence. And for a while, it was enough. But Rachel was restless. The world outside her little shop still turned with conflict, and in her bones, she felt the call of it. When the opportunity came to work as a contractor on a U.S. military base overseas, she took it. She told herself it was just for the pay, just for the chance to see the world. But deep down, she knew it was more. It was a way to stay close to the life she had walked away from, without ever admitting it. On the base, her reputation grew quickly. Soldiers came to her not just for haircuts, but for the comfort of her presence. She remembered names, faces, stories. She became the person they talked to when the weight of war pressed too heavily on their shoulders. She kept secrets that no one else would ever hear. Still, none of them knew who she really was. None of them knew about the girl who had crawled through mud at 9 years old, or the teenager who could outshoot her father at 16. None of them knew how many nights she sat awake, fingers tracing the stock of the rifle she still kept hidden in a case beneath her bed. They saw only the calm smile, the steady hands, the woman who made them look sharp for inspection. She told herself that was enough. But late at night, when the base was quiet and only the hum of distant generators filled the air, she wondered. She wondered if her father had known, in those long training days, that he was shaping her for something more. She wondered if all his lessons were seeds, waiting for the moment they'd be forced to bloom. Rachel tried to bury that thought with routine. She folded towels, sanitized clippers, swept the floor until it gleamed. She told herself she was just the hairdresser, nothing more. But the truth lingered, heavy and unspoken. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. The world has a way of testing us when we least expect it. The question is, will you be ready? On that base, surrounded by warfighters, Rachel thought she had left her past behind. She thought she could live quietly, scissors in hand, watching battles from the safety of her shop. She had no idea that the test her father spoke of was coming faster than she could imagine. And when it arrived, the hairdresser mask would fall away, revealing the warrior she had always been meant to be. The night was ordinary at first, the kind of quiet that lulled soldiers into believing the world beyond the walls had paused. The desert wind carried a dry, metallic taste, rattling the chain-link fences and whispering through the razor wire. Inside the base, floodlights bathed the gravel in harsh white, casting long shadows of watchtowers and parked armored vehicles. Rachel was closing up shop for the evening. The clippers were silent, the floor swept clean, a faint scent of aftershave still hanging in the air. She wiped down her scissors, folded her apron, and glanced at the mirror. A tired woman stared back at her brown hair pulled into a bun, dark circles beneath her eyes, lips pressed into a line, and never quite smiled unless she forced it. Another day done. She turned off the light and locked the door behind her. Outside, the base buzzed with the muted rhythm of routine soldiers smoking near the barracks. A pair of Marines joking as they walked toward the chow hall, the low growl of generators filling the silence. It was all so familiar, so steady, that Rachel almost believed life would continue just like this. Almost. The first alarm shattered the night. A piercing wail erupted from the loudspeakers, slicing through the calm with a force that jolted every heart awake. Sirens screamed across the base, rising and falling in frantic urgency. Rachel froze, every muscle tight, as soldiers spilled out of the barracks, half-dressed, boots thudding against gravel. Shouts echoed through the dark. Radios crackled. The base transformed in seconds from calm to chaos. Rachel's instincts flared alive. She had heard alarms before, drills, mortar warnings, security alerts, but this sound was different. There was no pause, no measured repetition. It was sharp, continuous, urgent. This was no exercise. She moved quickly toward the command building, following the stream of soldiers. Voices buzzed around her, fragments of panic bleeding through. Team's been hit. Radio silence. They've got SEALs, I repeat. They've got SEALs. Rachel's heart thudded harder. SEALs? She reached the edge of the crowd gathered outside the operation center. Through the noise, a voice rose above the rest, an officer barking orders, his tone clipped and hard. Confirmed SEAL Team Echo was ambushed 2 clicks outside the wire. Multiple hostiles. Reports say several operators captured alive. Compound identified at Grid Delta Tango hostile stronghold. 50+ fighters, well armed. The words hit like a physical blow. Captured SEALs. Rachel had been on bases long enough to know what that meant. Enemy propaganda. Torture. Executions streamed online for the world to see. Time wasn't measured in hours. Now it was measured in minutes. A younger soldier muttered near her, voice tight with disbelief. 52 of them? Against what? We've got nothing ready to move. Reinforcements are 3 hours out minimum. Another spat on the gravel. By then they'll be dead. Rachel's chest constricted. She could see the soldiers' faces in the harsh floodlight, anger, fear, helplessness. Men trained for war, yet shackled by the cruel math of distance and time. And at the center of it all was silence, the kind that followed unspoken truth. Those SEALs weren't coming back. Unless something changed. The sirens cut off suddenly, leaving only the ragged sound of voices and boots on gravel. Overhead, the thump-thump of helicopter blades began to grow, searchlights sweeping the desert beyond the walls. The base commander barked more orders, sending quick reaction teams scrambling, but Rachel could read it in his posture. He was stalling, waiting for reinforcements, buying time with plans that wouldn't be fast enough. Rachel's mind whirled. 52 fighters, well armed, experienced, against what half a dozen men willing to charge in blind. It was suicide. But leaving the SEALs in enemy hands was worse. She should have walked away. She should have returned to her shop, locked the door, and waited like every other civilian on base. That was the smart choice, the safe choice. But something inside her wouldn't let her move. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, steady and unrelenting. The world has a way of testing us when we least expect it. When it comes, you don't get to choose the fight, you only get to choose how you face it. Rachel clenched her fists. She had spent years hiding behind scissors and aprons, pretending her past didn't matter. But now, with lives on the line, her blood thrummed with the same fire her father had lit in her childhood. She knew the terrain beyond the base better than most soldiers. She had studied the maps, walked the trails near the perimeter, memorized the ridges and gullies. And she knew more than anything that she could shoot. Not just shoot, she could protect. The chatter around her grew more frantic. One soldier cursed under his breath. This is a death trap. 52 of them dug in? We don't even know if the SEALs are alive. Rachel stepped closer, heart hammering, though she hadn't spoken yet. She watched the officers circle the map table, arguing, their voices sharp. Some demanded immediate action, others urged patience, but all of them knew the truth. They were out of time. That was when Rachel realized something that chilled her deeper than the desert night. The base wasn't going to move. Not in time. Not for those men. Her pulse raced, but her thoughts were razor clear. If no one else was willing to act now, she would. Her eyes drifted to a group of soldiers strapping on gear nearby. Rifles slung, night vision goggles clipped to helmets, magazines snapping into place. They were ready to fight. And yet, none of them knew the back trails, the blind spots, the quiet approaches through the rocks and dry riverbeds. None of them knew what she knew. For the first time in years, Rachel felt the weight of her hidden self pressing to the surface. The warrior she had buried beneath scissors, and small talk was clawing its way back, demanding to be seen. The sirens had called more than soldiers to action that night. They had called her. Rachel looked down at her hands that had steadied rifles long before they ever held scissors. They were trembling now, not from fear, but from the surge of decision. She whispered to herself, so low no one could hear, "If no one else will, I will." The hairdresser mask had cracked. And though no one around her knew it yet, the base was about to learn that Rachel Hart was far more than the woman who cut their hair. Because 52 fighters are not, she wasn't going to let Americans die in cages. Not tonight. The operations center buzzed like a hive. Radios crackled. Boots pounded across the floor. Officers hunched over maps and live drone feeds, while young soldiers rushed in and out with updates that seemed to contradict each other every 5 minutes. The tension was thick, like static in the air before a thunderstorm. Rachel stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible among the uniforms, watching the chaos unfold. Her heart was steady, but her mind burned. Every second slipping by was another second. The captured SEALs sat chained in that compound, another second closer to the unthinkable. The officers argued in clipped voices. Too many hostiles, 50-plus fighters dug in. It's a fortress. Reinforcements ETA, 3 hours minimum. We wait for them. Wait, and those men die. You know it as well as I do. They're SEALs. They'll hold. That's what they're trained for. Rachel's jaw tightened. She had listened enough to soldiers in her chair to know what holding meant when you were outnumbered 50-1. Holding wasn't survival. It was stalling. And even the strongest warriors could only stall so long before they broke. She stepped closer. At first, no one noticed her. She wasn't supposed to be here. Civilians didn't crowd into operation briefings. But the urgency had pulled everyone in, drawn by the same gravity. Her voice slipped out almost without her realizing it. There isn't time to wait. Heads turned. Soldiers frowned, eyebrows raised. Some looked annoyed, others surprised to see her even standing there. The base hairdresser, apron still tied loosely around her waist, standing among officers and operators. She looked out of place, and yet her eyes carried none of the uncertainty of someone who had wandered in by accident. The commander, a broad-shouldered colonel with gray, streaking his hair, fixed her with a hard stare. "This isn't your concern, ma'am. Get to the safe zone." Rachel didn't move. "With respect, sir, if you wait for reinforcements, you'll be retrieving bodies." "Not men." A silence settled. Several soldiers exchanged glances, some smirking, some shaking their heads. Who was she to say this? Just a civilian contractor, a hairdresser of all things. The colonel's voice sharpened. Civilians don't get a say in combat operations. Rachel felt the weight of every eye on her, the disbelief, the irritation, the dismissals. But she also felt the fire rising inside her, the voice of her father, the memory of lessons carved into her bones since childhood. She had stayed silent for years, hidden behind clippers and small talk. That silence ended now. "I know the terrain," she said firmly. "The back gullies, the dry riverbeds, the ridges that don't show up on your satellite maps. I've walked them. I've studied them. I can get you close without being seen." The words hung in the air. One of the younger lieutenants scoffed. "What? You've been hiking out there in your off time? That doesn't make you an operator." Rachel's gaze didn't flinch. "No, but I can shoot. I can move quiet. And I know how to keep my head when everything around me is chaos. Can you say the same for every man you'll send in there tonight?" The room shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at her with amusement, others with curiosity. The idea was ridiculous, a hairdresser volunteering to step into one of the deadliest rescue missions imaginable. And yet there was something in her voice, something unshakable, that made even the hardened operators pause. The colonel leaned forward, his voice low, edged with steel. "Who are you?" Rachel hesitated for the briefest moment. Then she let the mask slip. "My father was Sergeant Major William Hart, Marine sniper. He trained me from the time I could walk. I can shoot better than most of the men on this base, and I can read terrain faster than your drone feeds can process it. You think I'm just a hairdresser. That's fine. But I promise you, if you go in blind, those SEALs don't make it out alive. If you let me guide you, you have a chance." The colonel's eyes narrowed, studying her. The name Hart carried weight. Every Marine on base had heard of the sniper who had once held records and taught courses that shaped generations. A few soldiers muttered under their breath. Still, disbelief lingered. "You expect me to send a civilian into combat?" the colonel asked. Rachel took a step forward, her voice steady. "No, sir. I expect you to send someone who knows the ground and won't freeze under fire. You don't have the luxury of options. You have me." The room fell silent. The colonel's jaw tightened as he glanced at his officers. One of the SEALs still on base, a grizzled chief with a scar down his cheek, finally spoke up. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of experience. "Sir, she's not wrong. We don't know those routes. If she can get us close without burning time, that's the only edge we'll have." The colonel stared at Rachel a moment longer, as if weighing not just her words, but her resolve. Her eyes didn't waver. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Fine, you're in. But understand this, you step out there, you're not a contractor anymore. You're part of this mission. You carry your own weight, or you die with the rest." Rachel nodded once. "Understood." A ripple of disbelief ran through the room. The hairdresser, was going out with the team. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered, but no one challenged the colonel's order. Not now. Within minutes, Rachel found herself in the gear room. Soldiers tossed her fatigues, boots, body armor. The weight was familiar on her shoulders, almost comforting. A rifle was placed in her hands, and as her fingers curled around the grip, a strange calm washed over her. This wasn't foreign. This wasn't reckless. This was the world her father had prepared her for, whether she had wanted it or not. One of the younger operators muttered as he passed her, half sneering, half nervous. "A hairdresser with a rifle. This'll be rich." Rachel ignored him. She was already in the zone, her mind sharpening, every detail of the plan slotting into place. She adjusted the sling on her shoulder, checked the chamber, and tested the balance of the weapon. Smooth, steady, like riding a bike you never really forget. As the team gathered at the staging point, night vision goggles clipped down, magazines locked, radios tested, Rachel stood among them. Out of place, yes. Unexpected, absolutely. But not out of her depth. The colonel gave final orders, his voice cutting through the darkness. This is a rescue, not a siege. Get in, get our men, get out. Quiet until you can't be quiet anymore. Move fast, hit harder. 52 fighters or not, we're bringing our boys home. His gaze flicked to Rachel. And you don't make me regret this. Rachel met his stare, unblinking. You won't. The engines of the transport trucks roared to life. The gates creaked open, revealing the endless stretch of desert night beyond. Dust swirled under the floodlights as the vehicles rolled forward, carrying them into the dark. Rachel sat in the back of one, the rifle across her knees, the vibration of the engine thrumming through her bones. Around her, operators checked their weapons, silent, focused. Some stole glances at her, still unsure what to make of the woman who had stepped out of a barbershop and into their war. Rachel stared into the night, her jaw set. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. The hairdresser was gone. What rode out into the darkness was something else entirely. The trucks rattled over the dirt road, headlights dimmed, every bump and jolt shaking the men inside. The desert night stretched endlessly around them, black and silent, a kind of silence that made every soldier's skin crawl. Out here, the darkness wasn't empty. It was watching. Rachel sat pressed against the cold steel wall of the transport, the rifle balanced across her knees. The operators beside her were silent, their faces half hidden beneath helmets and night vision gear. The faint green glow of their equipment flickered as they checked radios and weapons one last time. No one spoke to her. Some still didn't trust her, didn't believe she belonged here. She could feel their skepticism like heat pressing against her skin. But she didn't care. Her focus was elsewhere, on the map etched into her memory, on the ridges and gullies she had studied in the days she walked the perimeter trails alone. She inhaled deeply, the scent of oil and dust filling her lungs, and forced her heartbeat steady. This was what her father had prepared her for. Every lesson, every drill in the woods back home, every whispered warning about patience and control, it all led here. The truck slowed. The convoy pulled off the main road, grinding to a halt in the shadow of a jagged ridge. Engines cut. Silence fell. The team leader, Chief Donovan, the grizzled SEAL with the scar on his cheek, spoke quietly. We move from here on foot. No noise, no lights. Stay sharp. 50+ fighters means we're already outnumbered. One slip, and it's over before it starts. All eyes turned to Rachel for the first time since leaving the base. She felt the weight of their stares, but met them without flinching. Donovan gave a short nod. You lead us in. Rachel adjusted her gear, slung the rifle across her chest, and stepped out into the cold night air. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, the moon barely a sliver above. She crouched low, boots crunching softly against gravel, and pointed toward the shadowed ridge. This way. Stay tight, keep low. There's a dry riverbed that cuts close to the compound. They won't expect movement there. We'll have cover until the last 100 yards. The men followed, silent as ghosts. The night swallowed them. Rachel moved with practiced precision, every step measured, every glance scanning the horizon. Her senses sharpened, stretching beyond sight and sound. She felt the terrain beneath her boots, the way the sand shifted, the way the air cooled near low ground. She counted heartbeats, timed her breaths, every movement in rhythm with the silence. Behind her, the operators moved in formation, their trust reluctant but growing. They saw the way she chose paths that muffled their footsteps, the way she paused before every rise, scanning with the patience of someone who had done this before. They began to realize she wasn't guessing. She knew. The dry riverbed yawned ahead, a jagged scar across the desert floor. Rachel slid down first, landing softly, then signaled the others to follow. They crouched low, moving through the narrow channel, its walls shielding them from sight. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint crunch of boots and the distant cry of some desert bird. Minutes stretched like hours. At one point, Rachel froze, hand raised. The team dropped instantly, pressing against the dirt. Ahead, faint voices carried on the wind enemy patrol. Rachel crept forward on her belly, peering over the riverbank. 2 fighters stood smoking near a ridge, rifles slung lazily, unaware of the danger lurking just yards away. She slid back down, whispered, 2, North Ridge. Not moving, Donovan nodded, signaling 2 men to flank. Silent as shadows, they disappeared, reappearing moments later behind the patrol. Knives flashed briefly in the moonlight. The fighters crumpled without a sound. The team moved on. Every step deeper into enemy territory tightened the noose. Rachel could feel it, the weight of danger pressing closer, the certainty that one mistake would unravel everything. Yet with every yard, her resolve only hardened. She belonged here. She wasn't the outsider anymore. She was the point of the spear. After nearly an hour, they reached the final rise. Beyond it, the compound loomed a cluster of battered concrete buildings surrounded by makeshift walls and guard towers. Dim lights flickered inside, shadows of armed men moving along the perimeter. The faint metallic clang of chains echoed through the still night. Rachel's stomach knotted. The seals. She crouched low, pointing toward a narrow gap in the compound's defenses. That section of wall is weakest. Patrols don't cross it often. We can slip through there. Once we're inside, you'll hear Cage's north building. Donovan studied her face, searching for hesitation. He found none. He gave a sharp nod. You heard her. That's our entry. The team spread out, weapons ready. Rachel stayed close to Donovan, guiding with hand signals, her eyes never leaving the enemy's stronghold. Her breath came slow, steady. She felt the old calm settle in the calm she hadn't touched since her father's training days. The calm of a sniper waiting for the perfect shot. But beneath it pulsed something else. Not fear, not doubt, purpose. For years, she had hidden behind scissors and small talk, pretending her past didn't matter. But here, in the silence before the storm, she understood the truth. This was who she was. This was who she had always been. A fighter, a protector, a warrior. The first shot hadn't been fired yet. The compound still slept in its fragile illusion of safety. But Rachel knew the moment was close. Soon, the silence would shatter, and the desert night would explode into chaos. She tightened her grip on the rifle, eyes fixed on the enemy ahead. They were close now. Close enough to hear voices, to smell smoke from a fire inside the compound, to see the faint glint of rifles under floodlights. The enemy thought they were safe, thought no one would dare come for the captured seals tonight. They were wrong. Rachel breathed deeply, steadying herself. The fire was about to begin, and when it did, the world would finally see that she was far more than the base hairdresser. The world seemed to hold its breath. Rachel crouched in the dirt, her body low against the ridge, eyes fixed on the compound less than 200 yards ahead. The enemy moved lazily inside, silhouettes shifting under the yellow glow of lanterns. Some patrolled the walls, others sat smoking or talking, their rifles leaning against sandbags. The seals waited behind her, still as shadows, each man locked into the rhythm of war. The radios were silent. No one dared speak. They all knew this was the moment between life and death, the razor-thin edge before steel clashed in the dark. Rachel adjusted her rifle, resting the barrel along the ridge, her cheek pressed firmly against the stock. Her breathing slowed, heartbeat sinking to the crosshairs. Her father's voice whispered in memory, clear as if he were beside her. Patience. Breathe with the earth. Let the target reveal himself. Don't force it, she waited. One of the guards near the northern wall shifted, stepping just into the narrow cone of light from a lantern. His rifle slung low. His shoulders relaxed. Rachel exhaled. Her finger squeezed. The suppressed shot cracked softly, barely more than a cough in the night. The guard jerked once, his body folding to the ground without a sound. The first strike. Everything froze. For a fraction of a second, the compound remained unaware, the enemy oblivious to the death that had whispered through the air. Then, as the seconds ticked, the realization began to spread. Heads turned. Voices rose. Confusion rippled outward like a shockwave. Rachel didn't hesitate. She shifted aim, lined up the next sentry, and fired. Another muffled crack, another body crumpled into the dirt. The seals moved instantly. Ghost-like, they flowed from the ridge into the shadows below, boots silent, rifles raised. Rachel slid down with them, her weapon steady, eyes scanning the perimeter. The alarm came a moment later. A shout rang out, harsh and panicked. A flare hissed upward, bathing the compound in sickly red light. And with that, the silence shattered. Gunfire erupted. The seals stormed forward, precision and fury in every movement. Bullets tore into the compound walls, shredding sandbags and splintering wood. Grenades thumped into the dirt, concussions shaking the night. The fighters inside scrambled for cover, yelling in their language, firing blindly into the darkness. Rachel moved with the team, not behind them but beside them, her rifle an extension of her body. She dropped another guard from 50 yards, then pivoted, cutting down a fighter on the wall, who raised an RPG to his shoulder. Her shots were clean, controlled, every breath measured. Donovan barked orders over coms, his voice sharp and steady. Push left flank. Suppress the tower. Heart cover our 6. Rachel obeyed without hesitation, pivoting to the rear as a squad of fighters rushed from a side gate. Her crosshairs found the lead man, and he dropped before his feet cleared the threshold. She fired again and again, carving holes in the wave until the rest scattered into the dirt. She barely registered the men's faces anymore. They weren't individuals, they were obstacles, threats to the mission. Her world had shrunk to targets, angles, and breath. The seals reached the wall, charges planted at the weak section Rachel had identified. A muffled explosion ripped through concrete, blasting open a jagged entry point. Smoke billowed. The team poured through, rifles barking in synchronized rhythm. Rachel followed, ducking low as bullets whizzed overhead. Inside, the compound was chaos fighters running, shouting, weapons firing from every angle. Tracer rounds streaked through the smoke. Sparks flew as metal tore under gunfire. She caught sight of a cage at the far end, shadowy figures hunched inside. Chains rattled, voices rising in desperation. The captured seals. North building. Donovan roared. The team surged toward it, cutting through resistance with surgical violence. Rachel covered the rear, pivoting smoothly, dropping any fighter who dared rise from cover. Her rifle was steady, her movements precise. There was no hesitation, no fear, only the clarity of survival. One enemy fighter broke through the smoke just yards away, charging with a knife. Rachel swung her rifle, too close to fire, and drove the buttstock into his throat. He crumpled, choking, and she finished him with a swift, controlled burst. The SEAL beside her glanced over, surprise flashing in his eyes. For the first time, it wasn't disbelief. It was respect. They pressed deeper. Explosions shook the ground, grenades lighting the night in bursts of orange and white. Screams cut through the smoke, followed by the staccato rhythm of suppressed rifles. The fighters were frantic, uncoordinated, their numbers working against them as they tripped over one another in panic. Rachel's hands moved on instinct. Reload, rack, breathe, fire. Each motion clean, drilled into her bones long before tonight. She felt no fear, only purpose. The cages were close now. The SEALs inside shouted, rattling chains, eyes wide with disbelief as they saw who fought beside their brothers. Rachel reached the north building, pressing her back against the wall as Donovan and two others breached. Gunfire roared inside. She covered the doorway, cutting down two fighters who tried to rush from the opposite end. Moments later, Donovan's voice thundered, "We've got them." Freeing the cages. Rachel exhaled, scanning the compound. More fighters poured from a side building, rifles flashing. She dropped two in quick succession, then shouted into her comms. "Contact east side." Heavy numbers. The SEALs adjusted instantly, repositioning to cover the new threat. Explosions rocked the walls. Smoke thickened. But amid the chaos, the captured men were being freed, one chain at a time. Rachel's hands were steady, her aim true. Every shot she took bought another second for the prisoners. Every enemy that fell brought them closer to escape. But she knew this wasn't over. The first strike had given them the edge, had turned surprise into survival. Yet the enemy wasn't broken. Not yet. 52 fighters had been waiting to slaughter a team of Americans. Now they were the ones trapped in their own stronghold. Rachel reloaded, chambered another round, and pressed her shoulder against the wall. Her eyes burned with smoke, her lungs stung with dust, but her resolve only hardened. The fight had only just begun, and she was ready for every second of it. The night was fire and thunder. Gunfire tore through the compound, muzzle flashes strobing against walls blackened with smoke. The rescued SEALs stumbled out of their cages, weak but alive, clutching rifles handed to them by their brothers. Relief rippled through the team for only a heartbeat before the reality slammed back. They weren't out yet. The enemy was coming. Rachel pressed her back against the cold concrete of the north building, breathing through the burn of smoke. She reloaded quickly, the motion automatic now, her hands slick with sweat and dust. Across the courtyard, Chief Donovan shouted orders, his voice barely audible over the relentless storm of gunfire. Contact from every side. They're closing in. Hold the perimeter. Rachel peeked around the wall, eyes scanning through the smoke. Fighters swarmed from every direction, windows, rooftops, alleyways. Dozens of them, converging with wild, desperate fury. The trap had sprung, and the compound was the cage now, not for the SEALs, but for them all. Bullets shredded the wall inches from her head. She ducked, teeth clenched, then leaned out and fired, cutting down two men charging from the east. Their bodies crumpled, but more surged behind them, relentless. A grenade clattered across the courtyard, bouncing toward the cages where the last SEAL was still being freed. Rachel didn't think. She broke cover, sprinted forward, and dove, snatching the grenade in one motion. With a grunt, she hurled it back over the wall. The explosion rocked the compound, the shockwave knocking her to her knees. Ears ringing, she forced herself upright. Around her, men were shouting, moving, firing, the whole world consumed in chaos. One of the rescued SEALs, blood crusted on his face, stared at her in disbelief. "You're what the hell?" "No time." Rachel snapped, shoving a rifle into his hands. "Fight!" The east wall shuddered as enemy fire raked across it. Fighters with RPGs scrambled into position on a rooftop, aiming straight for the breach they had created earlier. Rachel steadied her rifle, exhaled, and fired. One dropped, then the second, the rocket slipping harmlessly from his hands before detonating in the dirt. The SEALs pressed the advantage. Bursts of precise fire tore through the attackers, every shot a lesson in efficiency. But no matter how many fell, more replaced them. 52 fighters had sounded like a number in the briefing. Now, in the choking heat of battle, it felt like an army. Rachel ducked into cover beside Donovan, her chest heaving. He glanced at her, eyes sharp beneath his soot-streaked helmet. "You still with us, Hart?" She slammed a fresh magazine into her rifle. "I'm not going anywhere." He gave a grim nod. "Good, because we're not done." The enemy launched another wave. Bullets sparked against the walls, tracers slicing through the air. Rachel and the SEALs answered with a storm of their own, but the fighters were learning flanking, pressing harder, trying to choke them from every side. Back buildings compromised. A SEAL shouted, voice hoarse. "They're coming through the rear." Rachel spun, eyes catching movement through the smoke. Shadows slipped along the back wall, rifles raised. She pivoted, dropping 3 in quick succession, but more spilled through the breach. She shouted into comms, "Rear entry hot. I need 2 on me." 2 SEALs broke from cover, sliding into position at her flanks. Together, they unleashed a wall of fire, holding the line by inches. Rachel's rifle bucked against her shoulder, brass casings spilling at her feet. Her focus narrowed to the rhythm of breath, trigger, breath, trigger. The fighters pressed harder, screaming war cries, firing wildly. A bullet grazed Rachel's arm, tearing fabric and burning flesh. Pain flared white-hot, but she gritted her teeth and kept firing. A SEAL beside her grunted, clutching his side as he fell. Rachel dropped to one knee, firing over him, buying the seconds needed for another man to drag him clear. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. For every fighter who fell, 2 more seemed to appear. The air stank of cordite, sweat, and blood. The compound floor was slick with it now, bodies scattered in grotesque heaps. Donovan's voice cut through the madness. "We hold until we break through. Stay on me." Rachel knew what that meant. They couldn't win here. Not against this many. The mission wasn't to kill them all. It was to get out alive with the rescued SEALs. But to escape, they had to carve a path. She glanced toward the south wall, the thinnest point, closest to the dry riverbed. If they could break through there, they might have a chance. She pressed her comms. "South wall is weakest. I can guide us through if we make the push now." There was a pause. Gunfire raged around them, the roar of battle so loud it drowned even thought. Then Donovan's voice snapped back. "Copy. South wall. On your lead." Rachel swallowed hard, heart hammering. She wasn't just a guide anymore. She was the point of their survival. Covering fire. Donovan roared. The SEALs unleashed hell. Bullets tore into the enemy lines, grenades blasting chunks of concrete into dust. Fighters fell screaming, their advance staggered under the sudden onslaught. Rachel broke cover, sprinting low across the courtyard. Bullets snapped past her, chunks of dirt exploding at her heels. She slid behind a half-shattered wall, rifle barking as she cut down another man in her path. "Move! Move!" she screamed, waving the team forward. The rescued SEALs stumbled behind her, supported by their brothers. Donovan covered their flank, rifle spitting fire in controlled, merciless bursts. The team moved as one, following Rachel through the inferno. They reached the south wall. Charges were slapped into place, wires connected with shaking hands. Rachel pressed her back against the concrete, rifle up, firing at anything that moved. The charges blew. The wall split open in a roar of dust and fire. Rachel didn't wait. She surged through the breach first, rifle raised, scanning the darkness beyond. Clear. Out. Go, go. The SEALs poured through behind her, dragging the wounded, carrying the weak. Enemy fire followed, bullets snapping through the breach. But Rachel and Donovan held the gap, cutting down any fighter who dared give chase. At last, the team spilled into the dry riverbed, swallowed by the night. The compound still burned behind them, screams and gunfire echoing in the distance. Rachel collapsed against the dirt, chest heaving, sweat streaking through soot on her face. Her hands trembled around the rifle, but her eyes burned with fire. They had broken the trap. Against 52 fighters, against impossible odds, they had torn free. But Rachel knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet, because the enemy wouldn't let them escape so easily. And dawn was still hours away. The first pale fingers of dawn brushed the desert horizon, casting a faint glow over the riverbed. Smoke from the compound still drifted into the sky, curling like ghosts over shattered walls. Silence fell at last, broken only by the ragged breathing of men sprawled in the dirt and the distant wail of the few wounded who are still moving. Rachel sank to her knees, her rifle resting across her thighs. Her clothes were torn, her hands bloody, her face streaked with soot and sweat, but she felt alive. Not just alive, but fierce. She had faced death, chaos, and impossible odds, and she had survived. Not just survived, she had led, protected, and struck with precision. Around her, the SEALs and soldiers moved cautiously, covering the perimeter, checking for lingering threats. The rescued SEALs, still weak from captivity, stumbled forward, leaning on their comrades. They were exhausted, battered, and scared, but free. And for that, they owed their lives to her. Donovan approached, rifle slung, eyes scanning the perimeter one last time. He stopped beside Rachel, studying her face. The grime and blood couldn't hide the truth. The woman who had stepped into a hairdresser's apron hours ago had transformed into a force the enemy never anticipated. "You did good," he said, voice low but carrying weight. "More than good. You saved lives tonight. You've got the hands of a sniper, the mind of a tactician, and the guts of a Marine. I can't believe I'm saying this, but you're one of us now." Rachel blinked, letting the words sink in. For a long moment, all she felt was disbelief. Then a slow smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She didn't say anything. Words weren't needed. Her actions had spoken louder than any medal, any commendation could. The SEALs she had helped rescue gathered around, faces a mixture of awe and gratitude. One of them, younger and wide-eyed, spoke first. Who are you?" Rachel's eyes softened, and she let herself lean back against the dirt, catching her breath. "I'm someone who had to do what needed to be done." Another, older SEAL with a jagged scar along his jaw, nodded. "You're no hairdresser. Not tonight. Tonight, you were the reason we're alive." The words stung, but in the best way. Rachel had spent years hiding, pretending to be ordinary, burying the fire her father had ignited in her. She had thought her past was a burden. Now she realized it was her greatest weapon. The soldiers around her began moving again, securing the area, preparing to call in extraction helicopters. Rachel followed, rifle still ready, scanning for threats, always alert. Even as fatigue threatened to overtake her, she remained vigilant. The desert held secrets, and she had learned the hard way that one careless step could cost lives. When the helicopters finally arrived, their rotors kicking up clouds of dust and sand, Rachel helped guide the rescued SEALs aboard, ensuring no one was left behind. She climbed into the last chopper, back against the metal wall, rifle across her chest, and finally allowed herself a long, shuddering exhale. The base came into view below them, hazy through the dust and smoke. Soldiers lined the perimeter, watching as the team returned. Some cheered. Others simply stared in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the chaos and heroism they had witnessed from afar. Rachel's mind drifted back to her father, Sergeant Major Hart, sitting in the backwoods of Virginia, teaching her to shoot, teaching her patience, teaching her to survive. Every lesson, every drill, every painful hour of discipline had led to this moment. She realized then that his voice, so clear in memory, had never truly left her. The world has a way of testing us when we least expect it. When it comes, you don't get to choose the fight. You only get to choose how you face it. And tonight, she had faced it. As the helicopter lifted higher, Rachel looked around at the faces of those she had saved. Exhaustion and fear had etched deep lines in their expressions, but there was relief and gratitude and the unspoken acknowledgement that she had been the difference between life and death. A soldier beside her, voice low, muttered, "I didn't think anyone could pull that off." Least of all her. Rachel let herself smile faintly. She didn't need accolades, didn't need recognition. Tonight had been enough. She had stepped out of the shadows, out of the quiet, and proven that even those who seem ordinary can become extraordinary when the moment demands it. As the chopper soared over the desert, she watched the rising sun paint the sand gold. The world seemed quieter now, softer, as if it had exhaled after the violence. But Rachel knew better. The world would continue to test her, continue to throw impossible odds in her path. And she would be ready. Back at the base, she stepped off the helicopter, boots crunching against gravel. Soldiers and SEALs alike paused to look at her, some nodding in respect, others still in awe. The colonel approached, face stern but eyes softened by something unspoken. "Rachel Hart," he said, voice carrying across the courtyard. "You went into hell tonight and came out leading a dozen men, saving lives and taking names. I don't know what to call you. Hairdresser doesn't fit anymore. From this day forward, your place is with us. You're one of our own." Rachel nodded once, letting the words settle. She didn't need to speak. The weight of what she had done, what she had survived, spoke louder than any title. For years, she had hidden behind the simple identity of a hairdresser, blending into the background, doing quiet work, keeping secrets. But tonight, she had stepped into the fire, facing impossible odds, and emerged not just alive, but unshakable, undeniable, legendary. And as the base buzzed around her, celebrating the rescue and tallying the victory, Rachel allowed herself a small, private thought. She had honored her father's lessons. She had proven to herself that courage wasn't about the absence of fear, it was about action in the face of it. She smiled faintly, brushing soot from her sleeve. She would return to her shop eventually, scissors in hand, hair drying in the quiet hours of the base. But she knew, deep in her bones, she was no longer just the hairdresser. She was a warrior, a protector, a legend carved out of fire, steel, and desert dust. And the world would remember her.